Thank you for attending today's session, which is looking at co-production and equity, which is a learning event hosted by Hub Cymru Africa in partnership with Sub-Saharan Advisory Panel. And this is part of the SCCF funding that the Hub has received from, I get confused, it's not Department for International Development anymore. It's Kathy, if you got your mics on, you'll probably be able to say what they're called currently. It's just gone off my head.
It's FCDO.
FCDO, that's the one. So more acronyms for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think many of you know Kathy has been working with me to prepare the event today, but also obviously to run the whole SCCF funding that Hub Cymru Africa has received. And she has mic problems, so she might not be able to come in, or if she does, you might hear it's a bit jittery. So apologies for that, or you hopefully later on will be able to hear from her. Today, you'll get to hear a bit more from our speakers today. Some of you you're familiar with, some you aren't, and we'll be able to hear quite a lot about co-production equity, but really the focus is looking at partnerships and especially situations where there is a conflict or misunderstanding, miscommunication within a partnership. What do we do? How do we resolve that situation? What does partnership actually mean, especially when in terms to power imbalances that exist in the sector in many ways, and in a situation of misunderstanding? How does one deal and address the issue when there's such imbalances? And as part of it, we will also looking at decolonizing. How do we decolonize partnership? And I think that's a very interesting area of focus, and how we can actually create those meaningful relationships with our partners. What happened when things go sour? So from this session, we're hoping we'll be able to learn a bit more about those scenarios from our speakers today. Then what do you do? What happens next? On the agenda today, as you can see there, we have the welcome, had a slight delay. We'll do the introduction to the session, and then followed by a case study from Yetunde, who will share more about her work in Nigeria and the organization that she's involved in. And she'll expand a bit more on how partnerships, and especially areas of conflict that exist between organizations with local governments or government structures in general, but also community relations as well. So this is a very different angle compared to what Brecken Molo will look at, which is more of a case study of their partnership with the Molo Link in Kenya. And we'll share the experiences in some of the things that have been happening there and how they managed to resolve and obviously come up with ways to circumnavigate the issues that they were facing. And last but not least, we'll have Okari Magati, who will look at deconstructing and decolonizing the concept of partnership. This is what I mentioned earlier. I think I'm really looking forward to that and see how Okari is seeing from his angle, and how we can really learn from other examples that have happened previously, and how we can really look at the future of partnership in a different way compared to maybe how it has been seen in the past. And then last but not least, we'll have question and answers, but this is a very informal session. So if you do have any questions, please put on chat, or if you want to sort of budge in just a little bit during the presentation, you can raise your hand. Do not unmute yourself unless you're asked to be unmuted. So raise your hand or write on chat, and we'll be able to respond to you. And at the end, we have a way forward and the closing session after that. So straight away, Kath, have I missed anything else at all? Fab. I think Kath is still on.
I'm very sorry. I'm not sure if you'd be very scratchy for me. So sorry about that.
That's okay. We can hear you. And our first speaker is Yetunde Fadei. And as I mentioned earlier, she is coming from joining us from Nigeria. She's part of the organization, or she's the founder of REES Africa, but she has spent the last 6 years providing solutions to energy, poverty, and environmental deficits through youth-led NGOs, NGO, which is called Reese Africa. I've known Yetunde myself because she was a student at Cardiff University, and then she's been involved in a lot of the climate crisis, which include taking part, obviously, in COP26 that happened recently. She has participated in closed policy stakeholder sessions with local and international entities, such as the C40 Cities, IEA, and XPRIZE Initiator of the $100 million carbon removal funded by Elon Musk. Oh, interesting. And the Musk Foundation. Through Reese Africa, she has led the rural electrification of 11 marginalized communities in Nigeria without prior access to electricity. So she's very much a steamroller within the climate change and climate crisis agenda. And she'll be joining us here really talking about partnerships, especially in relation to government and local communities as well. Over to you, Yetunde.
Thank you very much, Fadili, for the introduction. Can everyone hear me? Okay, awesome. It's such a pleasure to be on here discussing co-production and equity, a case study from Nigeria. Like Fadili mentioned, my name is Yetunde Fadi, but before we go on, I'd like to shine light on what co-production is for the benefit of those who do not know. Next slide, please. So basically, co-production is collaborations and partnerships, as you can see in the image, and it can be vertical or horizontal across stakeholders to inform an action or to create change, while like strengthening stakeholders across the board for a mutual benefit. So what the goal is to actually have a mutual benefit across board. For instance, say for an international NGO or a university wants to deliver a research design that can ensure access to potable water and sanitation for rural people. Instead of just identifying a local NGO to collate the data, the international NGO, the university kind of like ensures that the local NGO is involved even in the delivery of the research design. And this can be done by leveraging the accessibility to the community, inviting the community to not just participate in data analysis, but invent very creative ways for the data analysis and involving the communities who are the beneficiaries through stakeholders engagement and knowledge transfer. But as we can see, it's not often the case in several settings, in several circumstances. In this kind of like dynamic, the difficult work of the data collection is outsourced to those in the field, so to speak, while the experts sit in their offices designing the research question and tools and dictating how data collection occurs, or even like analyzing and writing up the findings on your own. So it's kind of like segregated. And through this process, you see that power hierarchies are already being established. And this also is reinforced in the humanitarian aid, conventional humanitarian aid that we see. So this structure I talk about is where we see entities with a better standing due to like several factors, such as controlling the purse strings or whatever strings for that matter, hold more power to how things should be done, which can disrupt an equitable and truly beneficial intervention. So if these so-called partnerships are not aligned, or co-production is just a buzzword within the development sector, within development projects, just to essentially gain traction or to look good on paper, then the project cannot be sustainable, because over time issues will arise and it will create new problems while, solving the one that was even established in the first place. Next slide, please. So as you can see, I've got the global goals. Anytime I think of a project, I look at the global goals and I envision the global goals as an entity, like a sentient being, so to speak. And I say, what will the SDGs do in this case scenario? And because it's a critical criteria to fulfilling sustainability as a holistic sustainability, the SDGs has also identified that for this to occur, we need to work in partnerships with each other. And that's why the 17th goal is based on partnership for the goals, because it recognizes that there will be conflicts, things will go so how do we resolve these conflicts? How can we maintain strong and effective partnerships or relationships across board? And how do we really ensure co-production? Basically, what have we at Reach Africa, to put it in context, been able to do as a local NGO to disrupt these imbalances and ensure that the deployment of our project is fair, is equitable, and fulfills a mutual goal? So the SDGs are highly relevant, and reporting on the SDGs is truly important in communicating to stakeholders across board, claiming accountability and responsibility, and basically measuring progress over time. Next slide, please. So I would go ahead to share, we can just give a quick summary of what Reach Africa does, just to put this in context, the case study in context. So as Fadili mentioned, we are a youth-led non-governmental organization operating locally in Nigeria, and we provide electricity access to rural and unserved villages without prior access to electricity, prior access to the grid, to enable energy access and achieve climate resilience. But these communities, they've never experienced electricity, but by providing access to electricity through solar power, we can change lives, we can better their lifestyle and livelihood. We've been able to successfully implement this in 11 communities, a model approach. And as a result of our commitment, we work with a number of partners across board, from grant and donor organizations to local government, to private entities. And a huge stakeholder within our framework is our community of volunteers, who are typically between the ages of 18 to 35. On the other hand, we advocate and campaign to promote environmental sustainability, which is evident in our recently concluded project with the British High Commission in Nigeria, where we sensitized and created awareness about the SDGs to children across 6 states. So like a bid to deliver change, we have encountered lots of conflicts, spanning from partnerships, from co-production, from stakeholders invested in their selfish interests, to unfavorable government policies or donor requirements. I mean, we've seen it all. However, we need the partnerships to be able to scale impact, but there's just about what we can do alone as a local NGO. Next slide, please. So for this case study, I have identified 7 stakeholders that we've dealt with, which is the volunteers, the private entities and donors, the government, the indirect beneficiaries, other civil society, and most importantly, the communities. Next slide, please. But because of time, I will just be talking about the volunteers, private entities, and donors, and communities as well. And if we have spare time, I can talk about the government. So we've resolved the stakeholder engagement using the 7 key principles of co-production. Next slide, please. So starting with the volunteers, our volunteers are a huge part of what we do because they do it for free with no cost attached. So typically they are people that are passionate about ensuring energy access, promoting environmental sustainability, creating channels of change. However, we started to realize certain conflicts and withdrawal in the field and within this community. Not that they were not being valued, but they were burnt out from having to, execute our projects. And we realized that we, as a local NGO, we realized that we often dictate the terms, and this can be quite rigid, fixed timelines, budgets, stringent budgets, research focus, and this kind of made the organization seem selfish and not invested in their welfare. So, it goes without saying in this case that within these partnerships, volunteers hold power as they help facilitate most of our commitments, right? We started to witness volunteers leaving the community until we applied one of the 6 principles of co-production, which is creating or enabling flexible ways of interacting and working, right? So this allowed us to create more flexible ways of volunteers interacting within the community and choosing when to volunteer. So basically creating some sort of tolerance within the system and even giving us the chance to bring more volunteers on board. Next slide, please. I will talk about private entities and donors. It's not rocket science. Fundraising is key to our projects. If we don't have the funds, we can't do anything really. So we raise through different means. And one of these is leveraging the private sector and donor assistance to deliver favorable outcomes, particularly inclusive service delivery, However, we've experienced several situations where the private entities are more interested in photo ops. They just come, take pictures, just to, report. I see it as greenwashing, really. And this kind of derails the dignity of the communities we are working with and also goes against the outcome of the project. So recently, a company contacted me on a project developing for a client NGO on water and sanitation, and said to me that they would like to come to visit the community to see if they would be interested in partnering. So I was like, okay, no problems, you can come. But we explained the dynamics to them, and I was like, oh, you have to cross the ocean, this and that. And we met with the response, oh, okay, so we can't cross the ocean. And then they called back and said, okay, we'll come. But we'll come to also distribute some relief materials like food stuff, hygiene products, and stay in the community for a while. We want you to help us get the materials, but we'll send you the money. And I was like, no, right? No, because we are not a relief mission. Our core is water and sanitation. Second, we do not even have the data set to cover the suggested intervention. And the utmost priority identified within the community during our pre-stakeholders engagement is potable water and sanitation, not foodstuff, right? Because this in itself could disrupt the social cohesion within the community because we don't even have the data to back this. And if it disrupts the social cohesion, it can bring rise to hatred because it's not possible to cater for over 2,000 people within the community, So I said, if you want to go to the community on your own, it's fine. You can go ahead, distribute the materials, no problem. We'll give you the address, right? But we'll have to get the permission of the community leader. But to ask us to deviate from our goal because you pull the money string, that's a no-no. So obviously after saying this in the nicest but stern way possible, they realized that they won't be getting the photo ops and we are obviously not aligned. So they called off the visit altogether. We needed the money, quite all right, but we will not do that at the expense of the dignity of the community people, because the community are not just beneficiaries, they are also stakeholders. So we learned this from one of the 6 principles of co-production, which is a central principle. it's tackling unequal power dynamics. So this is not just from getting funds from the global north, from donors to implementing in the global south. It can also be local, as I've explained, and to even the dynamics where you have to learn to say no, especially when it doesn't align with the commitments you've made to these communities. And this is why so many rural projects in Africa fail. They start off on a great foot. They want go to get funding. There's a number of tweak here and there. But because you need the money, you go against the community need, and then you wonder why the community are not invested in the project altogether. Next slide, please. So for communities, it's typically in line with one of the central principles of co-production, tackling unequal power dynamics. So communities also have the power to reject and accept your proposition. It's a relationship. It's not a one-way street, and it has to be mutual. And because it has to be a mutual relationship, it can get complicated easily, and we can face conflict easily. It doesn't matter whether you've even done pre-stakeholder. You have to. It's like a marriage, so to speak. So I'll explain this, right? During one of our projects in Lagos, it's actually a riverine community, Lagos, Nigeria. We instituted the pre-stakeholders engagement, among other methodologies, trying to capture the community's interest before implementation. But on the day of the implementation, we already got a yes, everybody was on board. But on the day of the implementation, we were informed that the king has changed his mind. He said, oh, we had already collected a hefty grant amount from one of our international donors, and we were planning to use just a little bit of the money to implement the project, that he wanted his share from it. So it disrupted the whole implementation process, even threatening to use police to arrest us. But obviously, we during our stakeholders engagement, we liaise with the local government, and through the local government, we liaise with security agencies as well. So we employed an alternative approach, because if they don't want it, if there's someone within the community, particularly a representative, that doesn't want it, then there's nothing we can do about it. So we gathered the chiefs and other stakeholders. We provided proof of how the funds were raised from donations. But there was something the king said that really touched me, right? He said that he wanted to resolve the conflict with a man and not a young girl. And, it took me back. And after emphasizing that I represent the NGO and not myself, I had to place the community first, because it has to be progress over ego. So we identified a man within our team to execute the resolutions, and the evidence of the funds raising was related to the king, while the youths in the community protested at the king's palace. Eventually, the king granted the team and I an audience, and he apologized for his previous activity. But in the end, in as much as it was delayed, we were able to come to a resolution. In fact, he organized a party for us to mark the successful delivery of the project. Next slide, please. So I just, because of time, in conclusion, I just want to speak to other key principles of co-production. Reciprocity is a huge part of what we do. We ensure that while creating equitable partnerships, we respect the exchange. Oftentimes than not, we expect that NGOs, expect that beneficiaries give their time. After all, we are the ones giving them the electricity. It's not like they are paying for it. We are doing it for free. And because of that, we do not attach so much importance to them, but they are one of our biggest stakeholders. And I think this has to stop. This approach has to stop. We must reference them because this kind of fosters more trust and more responsibility sharing. In appreciating and ensuring reciprocity, you can achieve another key principle, which is capacity strengthening. Recognizing that each stakeholder brings their diverse knowledge, their skills, experience to the partnership. and just enabling each partner stand to help each other, learn and improve from understanding the people that have been affected by the crisis. So within the stakeholder engagement, we get people, not just the religious leader or whatnot, we get people that have been directly affected by their challenges to talk about it. Then we also leverage their local customs, their norms, and their own local research skills. Because I think there is a community in Tanzania, when we talk about biofuel, there's a community in Tanzania that their local customs kicks against using what's it called, human waste to generate electricity. They believe that what's it called, like the waste should be kept, is dirty, so it cannot be. So if you go into that community and say you want to implement biofuel solutions, there can be a massive rejection. So another example is while deploying the solar project, we ensure that the youths are trained. So they help us deploy the solar panels too as well on site. And this can reasonably pave way for more career and livelihood opportunities other than just the farming, hunting, and fishing. While trying to co-produce and ensure equitable partnerships, it is important that we as a local NGO preserve our identity and also protect the dignity of our beneficiaries. It is important that we also maintain our independence to enable us to do the real work instead of being manipulated by money streams or whatever factors out there, and also work in cooperation across boards too, because we should not just limit this to mere conflict resolution, but see how we can address root causes to enable or enhance peace building. Because the reason why we resolve conflict is to ensure that there is we build peace within the community, or we foster more peace within the community, or build social cohesion, which is typically the social sustainability index. So next slide. Okay, I think we've come to the end of this session. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm here for any questions.
Thank you, Yetunde. Wow, thank you. There's a lot of stuff in there to take in, which I think that all participants here today, hopefully you're taking in. Please feel free to ask any questions on chat. Raise your hand if you do want to speak. We have the kind of time later on for more questions, but in the meantime, if there is any burning questions, because there's a lot that Yetunde has kind of thrown at us, learning to say no. For me, really, how they dealt with the king situation was amazing, in a sense of really still wanting to work with the king and involving the king in the formation of the project, the delivery of the project itself. At times, you might get organizations, when they do get rejection, they try to bypass the king and try to deliver the projects themselves. And that's not what you did, which is something for people to learn personally. I think the application of co-production, how much we do co-production in the sector, I think is still very much a buzzword. People don't know so much how to, and I think we have someone from co-production in Wales actually here. So they'll be interested to know how the development sector apply co-production. But certainly something that to look at, and seeking peace building as a sustainability idea. Ways to address conflict. I think it's really important to apply that peace building approach when there are those any issues. I think I can't see any hands or questions on chat. I think people will hold on until maybe other speakers have come on board. Yetunde, please do stay on, and maybe you can share the government experience as well, which you weren't able to touch into later on. Thank you. And next we have a very different kind of approach to the topic today, presented by the Double Act, as I call them, Double Trouble, Paul Linderwood and Donald Trust, who are part of the Brecon Molo Link, a charity whose ambition is to help people or develop connections, partnerships, health partnerships specifically between Molo in Kenya and Brecon here in Wales. They are also founders of Disability in Wales and Africa, which is a network of activists within Wales working in disability inclusion within the development sector. I think they come as a double act. I'll leave it to Donald and Paul to continue. Over to you.
Today we're going to be
Yes, today we're going to be a double act.
But before we start with the
Before we start the double act, a brief introduction to Brecon-Mollo partnership, community partnership.
Brecon, as many of you will know, is a small town in South Paris.
Brecon, as many of you will know, is a small town in South Paris.
Mollo is a small town, a medium-sized town from the Rift Valley of Kenya.
And Mollo is a medium-sized town in the Rift Valley of Kenya.
The connection is from we both have sheep. The connection is from we both have sheep.
The problem, the connection is
From what they both have.
Oh, they both have sheep. The connection is probably they both have sheep.
But they look very different.
But they look very different.
The link between Brecon and Mollo started in 2007.
The link between Brecon and Mollo started in 2007.
Baba said not always from Brecon to Mollo City, what actually was the case.
7 or 8 people from Brecon visited Mollo to see what sort of activity they could undertake or was needed.
Yes. And the link develops a very similar to Pont.
The link developed was very similar to Pont.
With focusing on certain areas like health, livelihood, disabilities.
The focus being on certain areas such as health, livelihood, disability.
And the feeling was we have a focus.
And the feeling was we had a focus.
The theory.
Oh, the theory.
We have a focus on health.
The theory was that we had a focus group on health.
In both Brecon and Mollo.
In both Brecon and Mollo.
And we have a focus on livelihood.
On what, sorry?
Livelihood.
And a focus group also on livelihood.
Structured the same way.
Structured the same way.
And disability likewise.
And disability likewise.
Unfortunately, the theory and practice didn't quite come together.
Unfortunately,
the theory
and the practice did not quite come together.
And so we have to undertake a review after the first 10 years.
And after the first 10 years, we had to undertake a review.
At this point, I've been in the key because where I was on the first visit, and I'm that last main person from my first visit.
At this point, I'm going to bring in Donald.
Because whereas I was on the first visit.
Because whereas I was on the first visit,
I'm the last main person from that first visit.
I'm the last remaining person still involved from that first visit.
Until much later.
And Donald didn't join the partnership until much later.
So, Donald.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yes. Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Donald, also from Brecon. When I joined the Brecon Mollo Community Partnership, it felt as though very much it was a scenario whereby people would be traveling out to Kenya and delivering some training or helping transfer skills or something like this. And the atmosphere that I could feel within that was one of yes, possibly we are the white savior moving in, helicoptering style of development and then shifting out again. And there was, I recognized the power disadvantages of that particular relationship. And it was one of those things. And I really, Paul, if you could focus perhaps on what led up to the review that took place about 4 or 5 years ago. How did we start into that kind of review? What was it like in the boardroom back in Wales?
It was a very back in Wales, the first frustrating.
It was very.
Back in Wales, the first very frustrating.
Oh, those in Mollo felt very frustrated.
Sorry. Wales.
Those in Wales, I'm sorry, those in Wales felt very frustrated.
Because we realised nothing was happening between our respective visits.
Oh, because we realised that nothing was happening between our respective visits.
So in other words, the information that we had, the ideas coming out here and nothing was being generated out in Kenya in terms of activity. Right.
Very much so. Yeah,
that's understandable. And what did happen then to try and change that into what is a new model from our point of view? What did we do?
I think there were 2 big events in my head.
There were 2 big events in my head.
We were starting people outside the official place of Brecon Mollo.
We were starting to work with people outside the official partnership of Brecon and Mollo.
I better explain that Brecon Mollo was classified by the Mollo-Brecon Self-Help Group.
I must explain that the Brecon-Mollo Community Partnership was counterbalanced by the Mollo-Brecon Self-Help Group.
But that Mollo-Brecon Self-Help Group had basically been handpicked by the leaders of Brecon Mollo when we first started.
So the members of the Mollo-Brecon Self-Help Group had been handpicked by leaders of the Brecon-Mollo Community Partnership.
This were the people involved were what, church-based or community-based?
I don't church-based, so their church connection was a connection factor.
A lot of them were church-based, so their church connection was a factor.
And it was a kind of cohesion.
It was a kind of cohesion.
But unfortunately, it did not lead to development.
But unfortunately, it did not lead to development.
There must have been some benefits and some disadvantages. Would you be able to identify what they are?
The benefits were from that we had a oneness together at the beginning of the 10 years.
The benefits were that we had a oneness together for the early part of the 10 years.
But then gradually over time, we found that oneness, the translate into practical.
Over time, it was evident that that oneness didn't translate into practical development.
I think also the moral became very much a group of people who became basically just a bank account.
And Brecon Mollo,
the Mollo-Brecon self-help group.
Oh, sorry, the Mollo-Brecon self-help group
became basically a bank account.
Became basically a bank account
to allow us to transfer money.
To allow us to transfer money
from Brecon to Mollo.
From Brecon to Mollo.
And then when we got back, we get off the phone and start spending.
And then when we got there, we would get off the plane and initiate spending it.
Yeah.
I'd like to spend some money out in Kenya as well. Yes, that would be ideal. Yes. But the thing is that there was a couple. There was something missing. The community type stuff was missing at that stage. Yeah. And I feel as though there was a couple of events that took place that kind of highlighted the fact that we were missing that link. What were those?
I think there was a group of people together outside.
There were a group of people who were coming together that were outside the Brecon Mollo-Brecon grouping.
And then there's a message that this group has managed to
This group had managed to acquire a lot of wheelchairs. And I thought this is great and fantastic that they are doing something without us being there.
I can see some type of sustainability.
And I could see some type of sustainability emerging.
And I can see a group developing that had a very different mindset.
And a group was developing that had a very different mindset.
To the mindset that had become unfortunately ingrained
to the mindset that had unfortunately become ingrained in the original partnership.
The other issue was we did a project called about a film.
The other significant moment was we did a project about a film.
Yeah, we filmed the film around Mollo.
Which was filmed around Mollo?
No, we filmed.
Oh, showed the film, sorry.
Yeah.
We showed the film around Mollo. The film is called Judicana.
It's an award-winning film, I believe.
Yeah. And there was 12 students. It's about a little girl who had cerebral palsy.
The film is about a young girl with cerebral palsy.
And she goes to live up country.
And she goes to
live up country.
Oh, live up country.
Because her father has just died.
Because her father has just died.
It's not the person she faced from that community. It's a disability awareness film.
And it describes the pressures she faced from that community. It's a disability awareness film.
Yes. And because of that film being filmed 12 times in the community.
So because of that film being screened 12 times in the community,
we had a whole data comes to us.
We had a whole load of data coming available to us
Between people where we were and what happened, etc.
so data about disabled people, who they were, where they were, etc.
I remember that time because that really did kick us off into a situation where we reviewed our partnership very, very closely, and we travelled out to Kenya, out to Molo, and we sat around the table with the various parties, the community groups, bringing them into the existing partnership around the table. There must have been about 20 of us sitting in this hotel, drinking tea and having cakes and all sorts of things. And we looked very closely at how we could work together in order to get more of a community voice into some of the activities that was taking place.
Yeah.
And what happened then, Paul? What?
Well, we've obviously we've been involved in several discussions with people during between November 1989 and June 2018 and 2019.
So we had been involved in several discussions between November 2018 and June 2019.
That culminated in the meeting that we referred to.
So that culminated in the meeting to which you referred, Donald. That was it, the round table community meeting?
Yes.
Which we described as a round table community meeting. So all parties and the what does that say?
Don't mind.
Okay.
Yes, I remember that after that event, there was we shifted a community-based organisation was created within Molo, and that community-based organisation was made up of several other community-based organisations around the region, and so they were collaborating together locally in order to look at some of the issues that they wanted to address in terms of livelihood, education, health, and disability, which were all the areas that we were interested in terms of what we were doing here. But I felt that there was a significant power shift at that point, whereas the trustees sitting in Wales sat back and listened to more to the community members in the area that we were looking at. And that power shift, I think, was an incredibly moving moment from my point of view, especially when the partnership deals were revised and changed and signed by all those parties.
But I think also the power shift in Molo was.
I think also there was a power shift in Molo as well.
It wasn't just the people in the fact we can see a power shift.
It wasn't just the people in Brecon listening, it was the fact they could see a power shift in Molo.
And they could see something developing.
And they could see something developing.
Yes, it kind of shifted from community leaders in Molo through to the community members in Molo.
Sorry, Donald and Paul.
We are moving out of time, are we?
Yeah, slightly. One thing I wanted to quickly ask, and I think I don't know if you touched into it, is there were new people joining the Molo link, and you still had the older members within the link as well. I think if I remember correctly, I remember you shared this, there were some tension between the two groups in terms of how to move forward. Maybe just elaborate on that slightly, and that will enable people to understand how you then, that tension that existed between those members, you were able to address it and deal with it. And I think that's also enabled you to change that dynamic that existed within Molo.
Yes, the tension was definitely felt by the community leaders themselves were reliant on the fact that they had this kind of relationship with a partner that had money, that had an economic background, that helped them bring finances, bring donations into the community. And that reliance was challenged in this meeting, and they were afraid of losing it. The community leaders were thinking, wow, what's going to happen if that kind of scenario was coming out? And by bringing together the community members themselves around this table, we were actually able to show that the community were not being represented within the existing relationship that we had, the one that we were moving away from. And from that point, it came out in several different ways, especially when we were looking at the way the community was dealing with government initiatives within the Nakuru County. The community leaders themselves kind of sidelined the government initiatives. They kind of said, well, we can't get in touch with them. They're difficult to get hold of. They don't respond to my telephone calls, all that kind of stuff. Yet when we brought the community members in, it was very different. We actually now have a very close relationship with the Nakuru County government, which is, a devolved power within Kenya, with tax raising powers and things like this. So that's very important, that the community, the members themselves, have a voice and are listened to within the government. And that was something that we were trying to actually achieve. And at that point, the realization by the existing community, the power dynamics that were happening at that particular time, I think they recognized that more of a community voice was going to outweigh their own particular personal egos.
Thank you. Yeah, so and nice to touch into kind of the current relationship, how that looks like as well. I think you touched into it, and that has enabled you to obviously work with Nakuru County government or local government as well, which you didn't have that relationship previously. And
I particularly remember a telephone call that I had with you, Fadili, at the time, saying, what do I do? What do I do?
Yes.
You were very helpful.
Thank you so much for sharing. I don't know if there are any questions. Please do feel free to wait until maybe all the speakers. The time is very short, and I'm very aware of that. And just want to say thank you to Donald and Paul. If anything does come up, pop on your head later on, please do feel free to share. For now, I would like to introduce Okari Magati Boniface, who is a Kenyan researcher, grant maker, and development worker. He has over 10 years experience in program design, implementation, and resource mobilization, working with a range of individuals, givers, foundations, NGOs, multilateral development partners, etc. Loads of experience, and he supports international development organizations to develop highly adoptive theories of change, grant trackers, and monitoring evaluation tools to ensure partnerships remain respectful and responsive to change, while at the same time reaching the intended project participants in the context. He's a member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, AFP, Kenyan Association of Fundraising Professional, and a certified project management professional as well. Very much someone who has a lot of knowledge, working with different stakeholders and really understanding how partnerships work. And for us, really, he's going to touch into something we are, as I mentioned earlier, very interested in, about decolonizing partnerships and what that actually means. Okari, over to you.
When I was thinking about the conversation today, I was asking myself, if the goal that we are looking to achieve is the same, then where is the conflict coming from? Of course, there's a lot of conversation of where the source of the conflict, but mostly it's around competition. So donors are competing. Just to look at it the other way. Fadili, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. So just going back, donors are competing for organizations that they think are good organizations to work with, because they don't want to do the groundwork of due diligence, doing capacity building, So they're looking for good quote unquote good organizations to work with. Meaning, if you are an organization or an individual who has an intervention and you're not quote unquote known, then it means it becomes very difficult for you to raise funding. That is where some of the conflict starts from when we look at it in terms of organizations. There are organizations, or there's non-compliance in some situations where organizations just don't want to comply with what the interest of, for example, Kenya, what are our interests in our 2030 action plan. So some organizations don't want to align. I don't want to focus so much on what causes conflict per se. Let me talk about what we should do or what needs to be done, right? Across. But my focus now is on a donor and an organization that are looking to implement projects within the context. The first thing that I think should happen is that all of us need to understand the context. People talk about context analysis and all that stuff, but what does that exactly mean? Who is in the, so when you're talking about context analysis, beyond just doing the pestle analysis where you're looking at political, economic, social, technology, and legal and environment, you're also looking at, you're doing a very thorough stakeholder mapping exercise. Just going back at what Chitunde was speaking about with the issue with the king, it's looking at who are the stakeholders in this area and how do they affect, and what is their sphere of influence on how I'm going to achieve, or we are going to achieve our outcomes long term as an organization, as a project, as a community. Some of the people who, or some of the stakeholders that have a lot of influence are not even in government. For example, in Kenya, we are very well known on Twitter as KOT, right? Kenyans on Twitter. Kenyans on Twitter have very serious influence on how change in some things happen. Now imagine as a community or as an organization, you find yourself on the negative side of Kenyans on Twitter. So it's looking at such considerations. You're doing a very thorough stakeholder mapping, looking at the energy of the youth, for example, and how does that affect your project? What are they saying? Are you involving them? That's beyond working with for my context, beyond working with the national and the county governments and understanding what other structures are in place. If you do a proper stakeholder analysis, then fundamentally you start getting community buy-in because they get to start understanding this organization or this donor, this is what they're funding. The other thing that I'll want to focus on is still on context, is people are talking about co-production. I have always looked at it from a point of co-creation. So we are sitting together, developing, for example, co-creating a problem-specific context analysis where we are saying, let us understand what the issue is. Let us come together and co-create what we think change will look like, right? As that is after doing your context analysis. It means then that you are also understanding assumptions. You're identifying what assumptions that might arise and trying to figure out how to mitigate. For example, if I was working with a partner to design a project in this time, then I'll be thinking, in August, we have elections. Before elections, we have 2 months that we will lose because of campaigns, right? If that project is not aligned to anything political. And then you look at how does that affect how the project will be implemented at that period. And what do we do, right? It means then that you're looking at assumptions and then over time you're testing them. That is around just still at the context. The other thing that I could do is doing a risk assessment as a project, be it with so the donor comes in, as it our culture, with a new donor, you host us in very high profile hotels. and give us transport reimbursements. It's part of the culture, unfortunately. But you're in there thinking, how are we developing a proper risk assessment for the project and for the people involved? And how do you do a risk register? So that we don't have things like safeguarding on the shops, but we're also able to look at how is this project affecting positively or negatively the people who will be working in it or around it or the community, right? For example, if we have people, we have projects in country that will support, for example, street connected children, and they will pull them from the streets and take them into, say, for example, a short-term rehabilitation center, right? By pulling that child from the street, how are you affecting the ecosystem of that child and the community that they are developing? So that is why I think you need to also develop a very clear risk assessment, develop a risk register beyond the core risks that we normally look at in operations for a project. Case in point, just going back to Kenya as an example, the donor culture has had that we have very high, what I consider very high facilitation costs for stakeholders. You pay for transport reimbursements, you pay for conference facilities in very high hotels, for 40, 50 community participants for buying. So the question has always been, are you buying the community liaisons or the people who have influence over your project for them to have a buy-in? Or are you going to the communities where that project is being implemented and co-creating solutions with the people in the context? If you have a project in Molo, for example, I'm using Molo because that's the context that has been highlighted in this conversation. And you want to bring people to Nairobi to tell them about a project you're going to implement in Molo. And you're covering for conference facilities, you're doing transport reimbursement. People will come into Nairobi not to care really much about the project. They're like, we're going to make money, right? So how do you develop solutions within the context where you are, within the communities where you are? That is one, understanding the context. The other bit is donors need to start thinking, how do we invest in the local resources? I don't understand innately why we will hire expatriates in areas where, or in assignments that can be done by someone locally. So the other thing is hire the right qualified expertise. If you look properly or closely, the local expertise is there. Kenya has had the donor partnerships for long periods. So whatever local expertise you're looking for, you will find. So hire the right people, hire locally, procure from the local communities. If you're supporting businesses, ensure that you're procuring from the local communities so that the funding remains in circulation within the community of the project. That is how, to a larger extent, you support buying. People will want your project to thrive because it supports the ecosystem. It supports the ecosystem of the community where it is. And then, as I had merely mentioned, you work with the key stakeholders from the mapping exercise to co-create a problem-specific theory of change. So you're thinking, what is the issue here? How would we solve that? This will greatly support. So you, the donor and the community representatives, it will greatly support the project, or for everyone to understand what are you trying to do. You align the project, you align to change so that all of us, all members in the community, all the stakeholders, including government, understand this is Fadhili Inc. And this is what Fadhili Inc. does. And this is how it's working with our community. And this is how we are anticipating to see change. So that when you begin, you are slowly starting to understand what kind of change you're looking to. Some organizations or donors come into a space, they give out money, but they are not very clear of what they want to see long term, right? The other thing, we've written a paper on this, we've written a paper that we presented for the Bond UK conference around developing an agile and highly adaptive approach to partnerships. So globally, this will respond to and align to partnerships with current context or global interconnections. For example, what I mean to say is this: the COVID pandemic has made us aware that we need to partner, we need to connect. If one of us is unsafe, then the other person or the other community is unsafe. So you look at partnerships in a very open and transparent point of view. What I mean is, when you're implementing a project, allow for creativity and innovation in implementation. So long as you're not affecting how change will look like, and so long as you're not going beyond what the budget threshold or budget lines are. So in communities, this will allow for organizations to make small adaptive changes during project implementation, since the context is always changing. And this allows for for partners to be always in convergence. For example, we anticipate that there might be skirmishes because of history within the context around elections. How are you allowing the project implementers to adapt in case there is none or in case there is? How do we align our projects to fit the immediate need that arises without doing constant communication to you every email? Adaptive programming comes because we've built openness and continuous trust that if the partner who is the receiver of the grant is able to make a decision without always coming back to you asking, what do you think of this? They will be like, I made this decision because it was justified because of this need. But it doesn't change. It is not too far away from the key outcomes of what the project was looking to achieve, for example. So I'm thinking, allow for open, continuous, and honest communications beyond the quarterly, semi-annually, annually reporting structures, field visits, those kind of things. Encourage program staff to innovate and to be creative during project implementation, as long as they don't affect the intended outcomes. So regular communication, allow for quick project adjustments, allow for open, clear communication. You are not a savior, you are a partner, right? You're not saving anyone, you're partnering for a given solution. We also just need to be honest and say, by partnering, you're also meeting whatever interest that you have as a donor. So come in with that thinking of how do we co-create. The other bit that, as I finish, build a community of practice where you're collaborating and you're networking, where lessons are learned and they're openly shared. For example, there's an example that has been given where various community organizations came together. It means that we are openly networking and learning. We are building on what we are learning to create very detailed and very specific projects that can fit what we are looking to achieve. Because when we compete, we are not sharing information. It means then we are replicating what we are doing and we are not achieving much, but we are in the same space, all of us implementing the same thing, all of us achieving nothing, all of us finishing the year, getting new funding, starting again, right? So this means if a partner wants to adapt and give an activity real time, you have to think, how do we come together so that we don't lose as network, as consortia? If you're doing joint applications, for example, as a community organization, what is your expertise? What is your area of specialization? That will be your area of focus. By specializing, then it means that you're able to meet your core objectives quickly, and you're able to be accountable to the other CSOs. We should not only think about accountability to the donor, we should also be thinking accountability to the community in a larger extent. So I've talked about think collaboration, not competition. Think how we do instead of how do I. Build strong networks, alliances, and consortia. build a concerted effort to reach the intended change within the context. This means we are sharing data, we are learning together, we are identifying opportunities together, we are influencing change. For example, the partnership that has been developed with, for example, Nakuru County. If they go together as community organizations, it will be very easy to influence change because they are together, because they are thinking, they're collaborating. The last bit for donors is allow for a bit of unrestricted funding. Not all funding has to have very concrete, very difficult log frames, very stringent structures. Allow for unrestricted funding. So large and small donors should allow for unrestricted funding. It helps a lot to support innovation because then organizations are able to think how, with this small pocket of funding, how do we innovate, right? How do we innovate? How do we pilot small projects through innovation that we can later scale up, right? And also then it emphasizes on learning moving forward. So that is, I think, what my presentation looks like in a nutshell. Sorry for saying too many things.
Not too many things, many wonderful things. Asante sana. No, thank you so much for that. Gosh, a lot to take, a lot to take. I think you touched into more of the solution aspect and really making sure how partnerships work as opposed to how to address conflict. Really valid points about, donor competition, which we sometimes don't think about it so much. Donors want to fund organizations they think will deliver, the whole thing of track record, needing a track record. And obviously that hinders a lot of organizations that don't have track record, but obviously they have the ability to deliver the projects themselves. Yeah, I think Kenyans on Twitter. Oh yeah, I know about Kenyans on Twitter. It's massive for anyone who is working in Kenya. Absolutely. And you're doing this stakeholder mapping. They are as influential as your local government official, really, and beyond. So we definitely, I think, for anyone who is doing those mapping to really think about influencers and their role within projects and within these areas that you're working in. I can't really emphasize a lot. There's a lot of good points that have been made. You're not a savior, you are a partner. I think that's something really to take on board as we think about how we work in partnerships. I don't know if anyone has got any questions at all at the moment. We've had 4 speakers really who have highlighted different areas of work they do. Obviously, Brecon Molo very openly talk about their experiences in working in Molo, similar to Yetunde as well. Any burning question from anyone? I think for me, if I may start with Okari.
Yes.
Yeah, with because you touch into unrestricted funding, for example, and how that impacts, allows innovation. What do you think donors do not sort of try to allocate unrestricted funding? And do you see any change at all in the last, there's a lot of conversations right now about reimagining grant making, reimagining new ways of working. Do you see any movement in that area?
For example, there's a small charity in the UK that we work with. It's called Toy Box. They are very, very keen on innovation. So we are slowly starting to see small pockets of funding being given to support innovation. Not largely, and we don't expect to have a lot of it. We expect that depending on the type of organization, to have small pockets of funding that support innovation. It means then that once you get that funding, you have an opportunity to innovate, not to sit on the money, not to put the money in your own pocket. It's what are you innovating? And then put in risk. For example, one of the things that I was currently working on is a research with Global Challenges Research funded in partnership with the University of Ireland and Islands. And we are looking at participatory approaches around working with children, especially and working with the youth, and how do we get information beyond just doing questionnaires and focus group discussions, which don't generate as much information if you want to have interactive conversations. By doing that, you get opportunities to rethink how do you innovate your projects, how do you scale up. But just to answer your question, I think slowly by slowly we are starting to see organizations putting small pockets of funding into innovation, including the big organizations.
That's great. That's great to hear. I think that's, I might even share, Kari, it's the same thing that's happening here within the UK, especially within Wales. We're seeing a few more funders who are kind of opening up and really advertising and say we do give unrestricted funding. And for me, it's definitely, a phenomenon of sort within the last 2-3 years, because prior to that, I think it was more project-based, and then you expect to have some little bit of money maybe for innovation.
Yep.
Thank you for that. Paul has you have a hand up?
I think it's something that has been had for many years, and that is how far is the outside coming in, the problem is how fast we and maybe internal debate let's say Kenya as the way forward. And I often say Africa has its own solution. It just needs to be
Okay, I often say Africa has its own solutions. It just needs enabling to find those solutions.
I'm having gone out to in that situation.
And having an outsider coming in can be problematic in that situation.
It implies the outsider has the solution.
Because the implication is the outsider has the solution.
That's the implication. How do we
address that?
Yeah. I'm from the here. What African solutions are what European solutions are.
Because African solutions are not. Sorry.
I'm far more interested to hear. I'm far more interested
to hear
what African solutions are.
What African solutions are
Than European solutions.
Than the European solutions.
Yeah.
Okari.
First, I will, I think, start with Donald's question, because it came in a bit earlier. It's how do you monitor accountability between self-interest and community conscience? I think self-interest, it's always good to be honest. Self-interest will always be there in any partnership. We're in that partnership because of self-interest. How do we sit together and ensure that we are co-creating a solution that also caters for what our self-interest is? It would be very unfair for me to say that we should not care about what our self-interests are. We should care about what the community interests are. We should always be thinking, in my opinion, how do we co-create problem-specific theories of change that capture both the conscience of the community and also capturing our self-interest. Because in some instances, you find what your self-interest is what funds you to fund whatever partner you're working with. That's just that's what my thinking could be around that particular issue.
Thank you, Kari. I don't know if Yetunde got anything to add at all.
As Okari has said, self-interest, you have to put aside your self-interest and focus on what the collaboration would yield. And just to tie into what I said earlier about me having to put my ego aside for the progress of the community. So self-interest sabotages a whole lot when it comes to working with communities or in community development. And in order for you to, ensure that self-interest doesn't play a role, that means everyone has to agree to a mutual goal. So everyone is working towards that goal. Okay, what's the goal? The goal is to ensure that these people have access to electricity. How will that contribute to development? Okay, if they have access to electricity, it would improve their rural landscape. It would mean that we'll fulfill energy transition by or before 2030, or you would even help to improve climate resilience. So everyone understands that mutual goal. So in a case where self-interest comes to play, you have to let that go to enable the mutual goal to be actualized.
Thank you. Thank you, Yetunde. I was going to bring someone in very quickly, and just bear with me because Margaret had a hand up. So I don't know if you wanted to come in, Margaret.
Oh, well, it was, I think it's partly being discussed in the chat. Sometimes the difficulties are not necessarily that people want to come and impose solutions, but it's restrictions placed by donor parameters that, they have to have their version of what is accountability for, how things are spent and how things are done, and it's imposing their monitoring and evaluation frameworks that then I think leads to more of an impression of not necessarily savior, but just imposing a solution, because they're small charities like us, where you're constantly concerned about your obligations to the Charities Commission, plus whatever promises you have made to your donors, and they've said it has to be done in this way and spent in this way, and that, I think that's a really difficult balance to make between how that feels, things are being imposed on rather than it being a partnership. And I think it sometimes comes from those pressures as opposed to necessarily people feeling, on this side of the world that we've got the solutions, but it's just the straitjackets of charitable funding and donor priorities. And I wonder how you balance that.
Tough one. Well, tough
Can
one.
I respond to that?
Yeah, I was going to ask you,
Yetunde.
So here's the reasoning, right? You give me this funding as a small charity, and then I probably implement the solution with the local NGO. But because of this stringent requirements and all that, you're not able to implement to the right tune, so to speak, that benefits the community. And in the long run, the project fails. And then you wonder why so many rural projects in Nigeria fails. This is one of the major reasons. So you can go back to the donor and say, do you actually just want to spend money, do the photo ops, enjoy the short-term buzz, or you want it to last long-term? If you want it to last long-term, you have to enable us work with these communities through the local NGOs, and do not put this stringent requirement on us. So it's not a function of we cannot fulfill. We are considering the fact that if you put this stringent requirement on us, we will not be able to achieve so much, or the project will not be sustainable. So which would you want to pick? Do you want to enjoy the short term, or do you want this to actually last?
Thank you, Yetunde, for sharing. And I've missed one question. I think that was addressed to you. I don't know if that was, sorry, I missed that on a few things on chat. But before that, I'd like to bring someone, and this is, I know we're going over time slightly. It won't be too long. Want to bring someone, since she's here, Emma, from the co-production, just to say a little bit about co-production and in relation to conflict or issues or misunderstanding during partnerships. Please do introduce yourself and say a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I just relate with so much of what you're saying. So my name's Emma. I'm with the Co-Production Network for Wales. We are a membership organisation. We work with public services and organisations in the third sector who are looking to understand co-production and implement it in their sort of in their workings with people who are particularly service users and people with lived experience, so that they can help to have input into decision making and also the services that they receive. And yeah, so that's what we do in a nutshell. But I think so much of what we discuss as a community of practice is all of these things in terms of, you know, the power dynamics, the fact that with funding, you know, often there are lots and lots of conditions play, the realities of working with people, and that's something that we're is working with people and not doing things to people and for people, because we want to see a Wales that's more sustainable and equitable. And the only way to get that, we believe, is by involving people in the decisions that affect them in their lives. I know one of the things that you asked me to touch on in terms of co-production was avoiding conflict with partnerships. But what I would say is that actually sometimes we think that you kind of have to tackle conflict head on and have those difficult conversations, because one of the key things of co-production is building relationships, and co-production does take time. But once you've built those relationships and you've got those solid foundations and that trust there and that shared understanding, that then avoids future conflict. But I think it's about getting everybody around the table as equals, and not having those kind of structures and those hierarchies that normally get in the way of people working together. And that does take time. And unfortunately, that feeds back into the whole discussion around, you know, timescales, funding, all that sort of thing. But actually, in the long term, working co-productively is much more sustainable and much more accessible and inclusive. So yeah, that's what we're about. So yeah, thank you for bringing me into the discussion. And I've really enjoyed listening to everybody. It's been really fascinating and really interesting. And I'm sorry I was late again. For some reason, it didn't go in my calendar.
No worries at all, really. Thank you so much for sharing. And especially for those who are based in Wales, you have heard from Emma about the co-production, what they do. I think you can find out more online. But I think for today, we've really come to an end. I don't want to drag it a bit longer. I really just want to say thank you so much to our speakers today. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Donald. Thank you, Kari. Thank you, Tunde. And thank you all for attending the session today.